Montana Territory, 1878. A place where the howling wind carried more than just snow, it carried judgment, fear, and the echoes of conflict. The blizzard had been relentless for days, transforming the landscape into a white prison that trapped everyone in their homes. Everyone except Eleanor Blackwood. Have you ever faced a moment when doing what's right meant risking everything? When the line between enemy and friend blurred before your eyes? This is the story of a choice that would challenge an entire community's beliefs, a tale of courage that continues to echo through time. The Montana Territory in 1878 was no place for the faint of heart. Settlers carved out existences from unforgiving land while tensions with indigenous tribes created an atmosphere of constant vigilance. Justice was often swift and merciless, dispensed by those with the most guns or the loudest voices. Winter brought its own brand of justice, harsh and impartial. The current blizzard had already claimed 2 lives in outlying homesteads, their bodies found frozen when neighbors checked after the storm's first lull. If you're wondering what happens when one woman's compassion collides with a town's hatred, stay with me. Like this video if you've ever stood up for someone when everyone else turned away. Eleanor wasn't supposed to be alone. Not in this wilderness. Not in this life. 14 months earlier, her husband Thomas had walked out their door with a gentle smile and a promise to return by sundown. That evening, they brought his body back instead, another casualty in the endless disputes over cattle and land rights that plagued the territory. He always saw the good in people, the Reverend had said at the burial. What he didn't say was how that quality had made Thomas Blackwood an outsider among the settlers of Whispering Pines. Eleanor inherited more than just their modest cabin that day. She inherited his outsider status, his principles, and the quiet strength that had drawn her to him when they'd first met in Boston years before. The townsfolk expected her to sell the homestead and return east. No place for a woman alone, they'd say, voices dripping with false concern. But Eleanor had made her choice. This land, harsh and unforgiving as it was, had become her home. She remembered Thomas's words on their journey west, "Out there, we can build something true. Something that belongs to us alone." His dream had become hers, woven into the very logs of their cabin, the garden beds now buried under snow, the future they had planned together. Eleanor stoked the fire, watching as flames consumed another precious log. Her wood supply dwindled dangerously. Without more fuel, the bitter cold would claim her before dawn. The thought of death didn't frighten her as much as it should have. Since Thomas died, she'd lived in a state of suspended grief, going through the motions of survival without truly living. Perhaps today that would change. Have you ever felt that staying put was its own form of rebellion? Comment below if you've ever stood your ground when others expected you to retreat. The 4th morning after the blizzard began, Eleanor pushed open her cabin door against the resistance of snow piled high. The woodpile was dangerously low. Without more fuel, the bitter cold would claim her before dawn. That's when she saw him, a dark shape against the endless white. At first, she thought it was a fallen deer. Then she saw the feathered shaft of an arrow rising from his shoulder like a grim flag. A Cherokee warrior. Half dead. Completely at her mercy. Eleanor knew what the settlement expected of her. Sheriff Pike's warnings echoed in her mind, "Any savage found in our territory is to be shot on sight." The Wilkerson family's massacre was still fresh in everyone's memory, 5 miles east, all dead, their home burned to ash. She approached cautiously, her boots crunching through the icy crust of snow. Blood had frozen in dark patches around his wounds, stark against the white ground. His eyelashes were frosted, but a faint cloud of breath proved life still clung to him. Eleanor glanced toward the settlement, completely hidden by the curtain of falling snow. No one would know what she decided in this moment. No one would witness her choice. The rational choice was clear. Turn away. Let nature take its course. One less enemy to worry about. But Eleanor Blackwood had never been particularly rational. She thought of her husband's voice, "The moment we stop seeing each other as human, we lose our own humanity." Thomas had believed it with his whole heart, enough to argue with neighbors, enough to stand alone at town meetings when others called for military action against the Cherokee. Her decision wasn't about politics or revenge. It was about the man dying before her, and the woman she chose to be. The decision formed in her heart before her mind could object. This wasn't about politics or territory or the growing tensions between settlers and indigenous tribes. This was about a human being dying in the snow. Eleanor dropped her empty wood basket and knelt beside him. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his copper skin ashen from blood loss and cold. Besides the arrow in his shoulder, a bullet wound marked his thigh. "You're not dying today," she whispered, though she doubted he could hear. Getting him to the cabin nearly broke her. His muscular frame, though weakened, was still far heavier than anything she regularly carried. 3 times she had to stop, gasping for breath, her hands raw and red from dragging him through the snow. With each painful yard gained, Eleanor questioned her sanity. The man she struggled to save might be the very one who had attacked settler homesteads. He might be the enemy everyone feared. Yet she couldn't reconcile that faceless threat with the wounded man whose life now depended on her strength. "Just a little farther," she panted, though she spoke more to herself than to him. Sweat froze on her brow despite the bitter cold, her muscles burning with effort. When his body caught on a hidden branch, Eleanor nearly sobbed with frustration. She tugged harder, feeling something tear in her back, but refused to give up. The distance to her door seemed to stretch impossibly far. A sudden gust of wind cut through her like a knife, reminding her that they both would die if she didn't succeed. With renewed determination, Eleanor bent her back to the task, dragging him inch by painful inch. By the time she managed to pull him over the threshold, Eleanor's muscles screamed in protest. She barred the door behind them, not just against the cold, but against the world that would condemn them both for what she'd just done. If you believe compassion should transcend boundaries, hit that like button now. The arrow had to come out first. Eleanor had assisted the settlement's doctor enough times to know the basics, but theory and practice were vastly different beasts. She worked by firelight, her hands steady despite her racing heart. The warrior remained unconscious, which was mercy given what she needed to do. With a kitchen knife heated in the flames and a prayer on her lips, Eleanor cut around the arrow shaft and pulled it free. Blood welled immediately, dark and alarming. She pressed clean cloth against the wound until the flow slowed, then cleaned it with whiskey from Thomas's dwindling supply. The man's body jerked at the sting, but he didn't wake. The bullet wound in his leg proved simpler, a clean shot through muscle. She cleaned both wounds with whiskey, packed them with herbs, and bound them tight with strips torn from her spare bedsheets. Throughout her work, Eleanor studied his face, the strong lines of his jaw, the eagle-like nose, the long black hair now matted with blood and dirt. Not so different from any other man's face. Certainly not the face of a monster that Sheriff Pike described when he spoke of the Cherokee. When she finally finished, Eleanor collapsed into her rocking chair, watching the rise and fall of the stranger's chest. What had she done? Saved a life, yes, but at what cost? If anyone from the settlement discovered him here, they wouldn't bother with questions before reaching for a rope. "What would you have done, Thomas?" she whispered to the empty air. Somehow, she already knew the answer. Eleanor checked his fever with the back of her hand against his forehead. Too hot, dangerously so. She fetched water from her dwindling supply and bathed his face, neck, and chest, trying to cool him down. Outside, the wind howled louder, as if nature itself protested her act of mercy. She had crossed a line. There was no going back now. Meanwhile, in Whispering Pines, Sheriff Harlan Pike paced before the gathered militia, his breath clouding in the winter air. "The blizzard's breaking tomorrow," he announced, adjusting the star pin to his sheepskin coat. "When it does, we ride out. There've been reports of Cherokee moving through the North Valley." The men nodded grimly, checking their rifles and ammunition. Pike wasn't just any lawman, he was a former Army scout who'd built his reputation on being merciless toward indigenous people. His election as sheriff had been unanimous after the Wilkerson massacre. "Remember," Pike continued, his voice carrying across the square, "these aren't people we're dealing with. They're obstacles to progress. Every settler who dies is blood on our hands if we don't act decisively." No one questioned his words. No one dared. In Whispering Pines, Pike's authority was absolute, his judgment swift, and his memory long for those who crossed him. Pike's hatred of the Cherokee wasn't just political, it was personal. 20 years earlier, during his army days, he'd lost his brother in a skirmish with a Cherokee hunting party. The fact that the army had encroached on their territory first was a detail Pike conveniently omitted when telling the story. "What about the army negotiations?" a voice from the back asked, Jebediah Collins, one of the older settlers. Pike's face darkened. "Negotiations? While we bury our dead? The only language they understand is force." The men shuffled uncomfortably. None wanted to appear weak, yet few shared Pike's appetite for bloodshed. Most just wanted to protect their families and farms. "We leave at first light," Pike concluded, dismissing them with a wave. "Be ready." What the townsfolk didn't know was how much Pike needed this conflict. Peace would make him irrelevant. Violence kept him necessary. As the men dispersed, young Matthew Porter lingered, catching the sheriff's attention. "Something on your mind, boy?" Pike asked, lighting a cigar. "Just wondering about the widow Blackwood," Matthew said. "She's all alone out there. Someone should check on her after the storm." Pike exhaled a cloud of smoke. "That woman's made her choice to live apart. She'll manage or she won't." His tone made clear which outcome he preferred. 3 days passed before the warrior fully regained consciousness. Eleanor had managed to get broth between his lips and change his bandages, watching as fever came and went like unwelcome guests. When his eyes finally opened, dark and alert, Eleanor was mending by the fire. She felt his gaze before she saw it. "Water," she offered, approaching slowly with a cup. He studied her with wary intensity before accepting the drink. After several sips, he spoke in halting English. "Why help me?" The question was so direct, so fundamental, that Eleanor found herself momentarily speechless. Why indeed? Every logical reason pointed toward leaving him to die. "Because it was right," she finally answered. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood." "Swift Arrow," he replied, wincing as he shifted position. "Cherokee." "I know," she said. "Rest now. Questions later." But Swift Arrow wasn't finished. "Your people, kill mine. Mine kill yours." His English was accented but clear. "Why you different?" Eleanor considered the question as she checked his bandages. The arrow wound was healing well, showing no signs of infection. A fortunate outcome given her limited medical knowledge. "My husband believed all people deserve compassion," she explained. "I try to honor his memory." Swift Arrow's eyes narrowed. "Husband not here?" "No," Eleanor agreed, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. "He was killed 14 months ago." "My wife also," Swift Arrow said, his voice softening. 2 summers passed. Soldiers came to our village." The simple statement created an unexpected bridge between them, two people who understood loss in its most intimate form. Eleanor saw something shift in Swift Arrow's expression, a guardedness giving way to cautious recognition. That night, as Swift Arrow slept, Eleanor wrote in her journal, "Today I spoke with the enemy and found him to be a man." "My people do not want war," Swift Arrow explained on the 5th evening, strong enough now to sit up and share a proper meal. "But when your people take everything, even the ground beneath our feet, what choice remains?" Eleanor considered his words as she stirred the rabbit stew. Outside, the blizzard had finally relented, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. "My husband believed the same," she admitted. "Thomas said we were the intruders, not you. The other settlers called him a sympathizer." Swift Arrow nodded slowly. A wise man. A dead one, Eleanor corrected, her voice tight. Wisdom isn't always rewarded here. As the fire crackled between them, Swift Arrow shared stories of his people, their traditions, beliefs, and the mounting pressure to abandon their ancestral lands. Eleanor spoke of Boston, her journey west, and the dream of a new beginning that had brought her to this remote cabin. Why leave big city? Swift Arrow asked, accepting a second helping of stew. His strength was returning visibly with each passing day. Eleanor smiled faintly. I was a schoolteacher there. After my parents died, nothing held me. Thomas spoke of the West as a place where we could build something meaningful. She glanced around the cabin. It wasn't supposed to be just survival. Swift Arrow touched the medicine pouch that hung around his neck. My grandfather say, life is circle. What seems like end often beginning. Eleanor's eyes drifted to Thomas's Bible on the shelf. Your grandfather sounds wise, like our Reverend Matthews. She hesitated before adding, not all settlers share the hatred you've seen. Some wish for peace. Peace requires truth, Swift Arrow replied, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Your people must face truth of what they take. Two worlds, separated by history and conflict, momentarily bridged by circumstance and conversation. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that challenge how we see the world around us. By the sixth day, Swift Arrow was teaching Eleanor about Cherokee medicine. His knowledge of herbs surpassed anything she'd learned from the settlement's doctor. This plant, he explained, crushing leaves between his fingers, draws out infection. Your bandages were good, but this will heal the wound faster. Eleanor watched, fascinated, as he applied the poultice to his shoulder. How do you know which plants heal and which harm? Knowledge passed down, he replied. Many generations. Many mistakes. A rare smile crossed his face. Those who ate the wrong plants did not live to teach others. Eleanor laughed, the first genuine laugh since Thomas died. The sound surprised them both. In spring, Swift Arrow continued, I could show you many healing plants that grow near here. Your people often walk past medicine without seeing. Eleanor found herself imagining such a future, learning from this man who, according to everything she'd been taught, should be her enemy. The impossibility of it struck her suddenly, bringing her back to reality. If you survive until spring, she said quietly. The settlement's militia won't stop hunting your people. Swift Arrow's expression grew solemn. Nor will my warriors stop defending our lands. Blood calls for blood until someone brave enough to break chain. In those quiet hours, something shifted in Eleanor's understanding. The savage she'd been warned about was revealing himself to be thoughtful, knowledgeable, and possessed of a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Your people fear what they do not understand, Swift Arrow observed as evening approached. Fear makes them dangerous. Eleanor couldn't argue with his assessment. Understanding requires listening, she replied. And most people prefer to talk. Like now, he said with unexpected humor, I talk too much. Need rest. But his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary, communicating something beyond words, a recognition, perhaps, that in another life, in another world, they might have been friends. Or more. Have you ever discovered that someone you were taught to fear was nothing like you expected? Share your experience in the comments. On the seventh day, disaster arrived in the form of Jebediah Collins. The knock came without warning, 3 sharp raps that sent Eleanor's heart racing. Before she could respond, the door swung open, revealing her neighbor's weathered face. Brought you some, Jebediah's words died as his eyes locked on Swift Arrow, who had managed to stand beside the hearth. The supplies in Jebediah's arms crashed to the floor. Jebediah, wait, Eleanor began. Treason, he shouted, backing away in horror. You're harboring the enemy, Eleanor. Eleanor moved toward him, hands outstretched pleadingly. He was wounded, dying in the snow. I couldn't just let him. After what they did to the Wilkersons. To half a dozen other families. Jebediah's face contorted with disbelief. Have you lost your mind, woman? He's not responsible for those attacks, Eleanor insisted. Just as you're not responsible for what the army did to his people. Jebediah's hand moved to the pistol at his waist. Swift Arrow tensed but remained still, watching the older man carefully. Step aside, Eleanor, Jebediah warned, his voice trembling. I won't allow this creature in our settlement. Eleanor didn't move. He's a man, Jebediah. Just like you. Just like Thomas was. At the mention of her late husband, something flickered in Jebediah's eyes, a momentary doubt, perhaps, or a memory of the respect he'd once held for Thomas Blackwood. But the moment passed quickly. The fear and prejudice ingrained over decades reasserted themselves. No explanation would satisfy him. No plea for understanding could penetrate the wall of fear and hatred that had been built over years of conflict. They'll hang you for this, Jebediah warned, already retreating toward his horse. God help your soul, woman. As he galloped away, Eleanor and Swift Arrow exchanged a look of grim understanding. Their brief sanctuary had come to an end. You must go, Eleanor urged, gathering supplies into a pack. Follow the ravine north. You can reach the forest before they return. But Swift Arrow stood firm. They will kill you for helping me. Perhaps, Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she felt. But I chose this when I brought you inside. Swift Arrow studied her face for a long moment. Then I choose to stay. My life not worth more than yours. They came within the hour, Sheriff Pike and 12 armed men, their faces set in grim determination. Torches flickered against the twilight sky, casting long shadows across the snow. Eleanor Blackwood. Pike's voice boomed through the winter air. You are charged with aiding the enemy of this settlement. Send out the savage and face your judgment, or we burn you both inside. Eleanor knew what judgment meant in Whispering Pines, a hasty trial followed by hanging from the old oak in the town square. She had witnessed such justice before. Inside the cabin, Swift Arrow checked the knife at his belt, his only weapon. These men will not listen, he warned. They come for blood. Eleanor looked around her small home, at the quilt her mother had made, the books she and Thomas had brought from Boston, the life they had built together. She wouldn't surrender it to fear and hatred. Stay inside, she instructed. Let me try reason first. Despite Swift Arrow's protests, Eleanor stepped onto her porch alone, hands raised to show she carried no weapon. The man inside is wounded and unarmed, she called out, her voice carrying across the clearing. He has done no harm to any of us. Would you murder a defenseless man? He's Cherokee, someone shouted from the crowd. His people killed the Wilkersons. Eleanor's response cut through the cold air like a blade. Did he kill them? This man specifically. Do we now condemn people for the crimes of others who look like them? Her words created a moment of uncomfortable silence. Several men shifted their weight, avoiding each other's eyes. Sheriff Pike stepped forward, his breath clouding in the cold air. Your husband filled your head with fool notions, Eleanor. These creatures understand only force. My husband believed in justice, Eleanor countered. Not murder disguised as righteousness. Pike's eyes narrowed dangerously. Your choice is simple. Send him out, or we burn the cabin with both of you inside. You have 1 minute to decide. Behind him, the men raised their torches higher, as if eager to begin. Some looked uncertain, but none spoke against the sheriff. Fear of Pike nearly matched their fear of the Cherokee. If you believe in standing up for what's right even when you stand alone, hit that like button right now. The standoff might have ended there if not for an unexpected ally. Reverend Matthews, his white beard catching the torchlight, stepped forward from the crowd. The woman speaks truth, the elderly preacher said, his voice quavering but determined. We claim to bring civilization to this wilderness, yet we abandon its principles when convenient. Pike's face darkened with anger. Stay out of this, Reverend. This is a matter of settlement security. This is a matter of our souls, Matthews countered, opening his worn Bible. Exodus reminds us, "You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." The Reverend turned to face the gathered men. Are we not strangers in this land? Did we not come seeking a better life, just as our own ancestors did when they first reached American shores? A murmur ran through the crowd. The Reverend commanded respect, even from those who seldom attended his Sunday services. Fine words, Reverend, Pike snapped, but they won't bring back the Wilkerson children. Neither will killing this man, Matthews replied steadily. Or this woman whose only crime was compassion. Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude for the old preacher. He had been Thomas's friend, perhaps the only one who truly shared her husband's vision of peaceful coexistence. What shall we tell the Lord when he asks why we murdered a helpless man and the woman who showed him mercy? Matthews continued, his voice gaining strength. The question hung in the air like the smoke from their torches. Several men lowered their weapons, uncomfortable with the implications of what they had come to do. But Sheriff Pike had built his reputation on being merciless toward indigenous people. He couldn't afford to appear weak. "Step aside, Eleanor," he ordered, raising his rifle. "That savage dies today." What happened next would become legend in Whispering Pines. As Pike advanced, Eleanor stood her ground on the cabin steps. Behind her, the door opened, and Swift Arrow emerged, unarmed but standing tall despite his injuries. "If you want him," Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the clearing, "you'll have to kill me first." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Women, especially widows, were expected to be grateful for protection, not defy those offering it. Swift Arrow spoke then, his English clear enough for all to hear. "This woman saved my life when your law said to let me die. Her heart is stronger than your hatred." Eleanor felt his presence beside her, steady and resolute. They were strangers from different worlds, yet in this moment, they stood as one against injustice. "My people have suffered at the hands of yours," Swift Arrow continued, addressing the crowd directly. "Your people have suffered at the hands of mine. Blood calls for more blood until someone brave enough to say, enough." His words caused several men to glance at each other uncertainly. It was the first time many of them had heard a Cherokee speak directly to them, challenging the caricature Pike had painted. Pike's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance, Eleanor. Move aside." Eleanor didn't flinch. "We all face judgment eventually, Sheriff. I'm prepared to face mine. Are you?" She thought of Thomas then, his gentle smile, his unwavering principles, his belief that one day, peace would prevail. Perhaps she would join him sooner than expected. The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. The crack of a branch breaking drew all eyes to the tree line. 6 riders emerged from the forest, their blue uniforms unmistakable in the fading light. U.S. Army. At their head rode Captain James Forrester, his posture military straight, his expression one of controlled authority. "What's happening here?" he demanded, surveying the scene with sharp eyes. Pike lowered his rifle slightly. "Army business, Captain. We're handling a local matter." "Looks more like a lynch mob," Forrester observed dryly, dismounting. "I'm Captain James Forrester, 7th Cavalry. We've been tracking a group of bounty hunters operating illegally in this territory." His men remained mounted, their hands resting casually on their sidearms, a subtle but clear message to Pike and his militia. "Bounty hunters?" Pike scoffed. "We're dealing with Cherokee raiders." Swift Arrow stepped forward, wincing with the effort. "They attacked my hunting party 3 days ago. Killed 2 of my brothers. I pursued but was wounded." Forrester nodded grimly. "These men have been stirring up trouble between settlers and Cherokee for months. They attack indigenous people, steal their horses and supplies, then blame the resulting retaliation on savage aggression to justify more killing. The captain approached, removing his gloves. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. Unlike Pike, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. They profit from the conflict, Forrester continued. Cherokee scalps fetch a good price in some territories, despite official policies against such bounties. The revelation fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the gathered settlers. These bounty hunters have been collecting scalps, Captain Forrester continued, producing official-looking papers from his saddlebag. Claiming they're Cherokee when presenting them for payment, but we have evidence they've been taking them from anyone with dark hair, including settlers. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Several men lowered their weapons entirely. The Wilkerson family, someone asked, his voice uncertain. Forrester's expression darkened. We found evidence linking their deaths to these same bounty hunters. They've been playing both sides against each other for profit. He unfolded a map, pointing to various locations. There's a pattern to the attacks. They strike isolated homesteads near Cherokee hunting grounds, making it appear as indigenous raids. Then they attack Cherokee parties, stealing enough to make it seem like revenge for the homestead attacks. Eleanor stepped forward. Why would they do such a thing? Money, Forrester replied grimly. Fear keeps settlements paying for protection. Conflict keeps military funding flowing. Peace is bad for their business. The captain turned to face Pike directly. We captured 2 of them yesterday. They confessed to orchestrating at least 8 attacks blamed on Cherokee warriors. Sheriff Pike wasn't ready to concede. That doesn't change what she's done, he insisted, pointing at Eleanor. Harboring an enemy is treason. The Cherokee are not officially enemies of the United States, Forrester countered. In fact, I've been authorized to negotiate peaceful terms with their leaders. This man could help facilitate those discussions. Pike's authority was crumbling before his eyes. The narrative he'd carefully constructed, of savage enemies and necessary violence, was being dismantled by facts he couldn't control. These men, Forrester continued, indicating Swift Arrow, are not our enemies unless we make them so. The real threat comes from those who profit from our fear and division. Eleanor watched as understanding dawned on the faces around her. Not all were convinced, hatred ran too deep for some, but doubt had been planted. For now, it was enough. If this story has surprised you so far, make sure to subscribe for more hidden histories that challenge what we think we know. In the days that followed, Eleanor was spared the hangman's noose, but her reputation in Whispering Pines was irreparably damaged. Many settlers refused to speak to her, crossing the street when they saw her coming. Savage lover, they whispered behind her back. The general store owner reluctantly sold her supplies but at inflated prices. Children were pulled away when she approached. Even those who had begun to question Pike's narrative about the Cherokee attacks found it easier to ostracize Eleanor than to admit their own complicity in nearly killing an innocent man. When she found her well water tainted a week after the confrontation, Eleanor knew it was no accident. The message was clear, she no longer belonged. Sheriff Pike had lost face but not power. His wounded pride made him dangerous, and his memory for grudges was legendary. You made me look like a fool, he told her when she encountered him outside the post office. That's something I don't forget or forgive. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. Truth often makes fools of us all, Sheriff. The difference is whether we learn from it. His hand tightened on his gun belt. Your husband said similar things. Look where it got him. The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. You should leave, Reverend Matthews advised during a rare friendly visit. Some minds won't change in our lifetime. Eleanor considered his words as she surveyed her small homestead. This land had been her dream, hers and Thomas's. Now it felt like a prison of isolation. Perhaps, she replied. But running feels too much like admitting I was wrong. Was saving that man's life wrong? The Reverend asked gently. Eleanor's answer came without hesitation, no. It was the only right thing I've done in a long time. The Reverend nodded slowly. Then perhaps your purpose lies beyond Whispering Pines. God rarely plants us where we're comfortable, but always where we're needed. That night, Eleanor sat at her small table, writing in her journal by candlelight. The past weeks had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The woman who had dragged a wounded Cherokee warrior through the snow was not the same one who now contemplated her future. Swift Arrow departed with Captain Forrester 3 days later, strong enough to ride and determined to help arrange talks between Army officials and Cherokee leaders. The morning was crisp, the rising sun painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Eleanor had prepared provisions for his journey, bread, dried meat, and herbs for healing. Before leaving, he pressed a small carved wooden eagle into Eleanor's palm, his dark eyes solemn. My people believe the eagle carries prayers to the Creator, he told her. It will protect you when I cannot. Eleanor closed her fingers around the carving, feeling the smooth wood against her skin. Will there ever be peace between our peoples? Swift Arrow's gaze turned toward the distant mountains. Peace requires truth. Truth requires listening. Few want to hear. I heard you, Eleanor said simply. Yes, he agreed with a rare smile. And I heard you. Perhaps that is where peace begins, two people willing to listen. Captain Forrester approached, respectfully waiting for them to finish their conversation. We should move out if we want to reach the pass by nightfall. Eleanor turned to the captain. What will happen to him? To his people? Forrester's expression was guarded but not unkind. I can't promise anything beyond my intention to seek peaceful resolution. There are powerful interests who prefer conflict. Like your bounty hunters, Eleanor noted. And others in more respectable positions, Forrester replied, with a meaningful glance toward Whispering Pines. But there are also people working for change. Your actions here, they matter. Eleanor thought about that, how a single decision, made in a moment of compassion, had rippled outward in unexpected ways. As she watched Swift Arrow ride away with the soldiers, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died, purpose. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single choice, a moment of compassion when hatred would be easier. Have you ever made such a choice? Share your story in the comments below. Eleanor remained in her cabin through the winter, isolated but unbowed. When spring came, she made a decision that shocked the settlement. She sold her homestead and traveled with Captain Forrester to Fort Laramie, where she took a position as a teacher for both settler and indigenous children. The schoolroom was simple, rough-hewn benches, a small blackboard, windows that let in sunshine and the sounds of fort life. But to Eleanor, it represented possibility in its purest form. Her students came from worlds that rarely intersected peacefully, the children of soldiers, settlers, traders, and nearby indigenous communities. Many arrived with the same prejudices and fears their parents carried, eyeing each other with suspicion across the classroom. Today, Eleanor told them on her first day, we begin by learning each other's names. Not as enemies or strangers, but as fellow travelers on this earth. The carved eagle Swift Arrow had given her sat on her desk, a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. Some days, when the challenges seemed overwhelming, she would run her fingers over its smooth wings, drawing strength from its symbolism. Her final letter to Reverend Matthews explained her choice. I came west seeking a new beginning after losing everything in Boston. I thought that meant land and independence. Now I understand that true beginnings require us to see beyond the boundaries others have drawn, between peoples, between what is deemed right and wrong by those with power. In teaching these children to read each other's stories, perhaps I am helping to write a different ending to our shared history. Captain Forrester visited occasionally, bringing news of growing progress in negotiations between Army officials and Cherokee leaders. Swift Arrow had indeed proven instrumental in these talks, His eloquence and understanding of both worlds creating bridges where only chasms had existed before. He asks about you, Forrester mentioned during one visit, watching Eleanor's students practice their letters. He says the eagle protects you well. Eleanor smiled, glancing at the carving. Tell him it does. And that I continue his work in my own way. Years later, when tensions between settlers and indigenous tribes had somewhat eased in that region, stories were still told about the widow who defied an entire settlement to save a wounded warrior, and how that single act of mercy revealed a path toward understanding that few had been brave enough to walk. Eleanor Blackwood never returned to Whispering Pines, but her legacy remained, a testament to the power of compassion in a land where mercy was often mistaken for weakness, and the courage to stand alone for what is right, even when surrounded by those who would see you fall. The wooden eagle still sits on her desk at the Fort Laramie School, a reminder that sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply seeing the humanity in those we've been taught to fear.